Hello and welcome to Voices to Dream. I'm your host, Suzanne Mann, the Challenge Girl. And today I have an episode with a psychologist. Psychologist Chris Basten. I've got to ask him if I'm supposed to call him a doctor. I'm not actually sure. I think it's probably Dr. Chris Basten. And he's going to be telling us a bit about himself, his life, how he got into being a psychologist. I guess, I'm interested in what inspires people to want to help others in this way. And I guess one thing for me as well is there's part of me that thinks it must be very draining too, to listen to so much of what other people are going through. So that's something I want to talk about. But also a big focus for today is going to be on midlife crises. I guess I feel like, not that I like to admit that I'm in my midlife, but I guess I'm probably getting there. And more my friends, people around me, I guess I feel like maybe we're hitting that sort of stage. And so I'm interested to get his take on that. So I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be an interesting episode for you. And once again, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. Please, if possible, like, subscribe, share, and comment on all of the interfaces, whether it's social media like Facebook, Instagram, or on YouTube or the podcasting networks. Comments are probably the things that are seen as the most powerful, if that makes sense. And so the more comments that someone gets, the more they are then shared forward. So keep that in mind for anything that you ever see that you really like, more than just pushing the like button. If you're able to retweet it, or, if it's something like Instagram or Facebook, just put a comment there, even if it's like an emoji. And I'm sure that person will really appreciate your help. So thank you very much. Enjoy the show. And let's all learn how to maybe take a breath and work through this next part of our lives. Bye-bye. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Voices to Dream. I'm Suzanne Mann, the Challenge Girl, and I have checked, and it is Dr. Chris Basten with me, although he's happy for me to call him Chris.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, we're going to just so everyone knows a little bit of background. I know Chris, not because he's my psychologist, but because I used to exercise with his wife for many, many years in Australia. And every now and then we'd go on some trail run and Chris would join us. And I knew the back of Chris very well. Because Chris is the one that was running in front of me. So Chris, before we get into who you are, I just wanted to check in with you and see how you're checking in, because for me, it's about 2:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday afternoon in the Bahamas, but I've woken Chris up early and it's like 6:30 in the morning in Australia. How are you checking in, Chris?
Thank you for asking. I really like your check-in ritual. It's so much better than saying, "Hi, how you going?" Actually saying, "We're going to do a check-in now," and I really want to know. I actually really want to know how you're going. I've decided, after listening to your podcast and listening to your check-in, I do clinical supervision with colleagues at work in my psychology practice, and we focus on case discussions and things like that, and we're like, "Yeah, how you going?" And okay, let's talk about your cases. And I've decided I'm going to do the check-in, and we're like, I actually really want to know, like, let's check in, see how we're both going. What are we bringing to this meeting? So anyway, I like that idea.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you.
I'm going to be bringing that into certain meetings. Obviously, when I'm with my clients, our check-in can last 30 minutes, like we try to actually keep it down to 15. So we've got the rest of the the consultation time to actually advance things. But the check-in, we don't always do it when we need to. Anyway, thank you for asking. Right now, if I do an internal check-in, I'm doing pretty well. I'm still in the afterglow of having half of January off, where I did all the things that I wanted to do and really relaxed. And a week before Christmas, I was depleted and pretty tired and just worn out from pushing myself really hard, which I tend to do with work and family and things like that. So right now I'm feeling like, rearing and ready to go for the day, but also the rest of the year.
Nice. It's important to get that balance right, isn't it? And you know what it's really nice to hear someone who is in your position saying that they're not perfect. That you get worn down as well. So it's we're all in that situation, aren't we?
Absolutely. We have to accept that. And I think when you give yourself permission to say, I need to work on things all the time, with humility, it's just easier to do the work that you have to do to look after yourself.
Definitely. Oh, well, that's lovely. I'm glad. I'm glad that you're feeling rejuvenated from the break as well. And then I've caught you while you're still in that rejuvenated phase. Well, Chris, I guess I wanted to start because I was saying that one of my focuses for this episode was I wanted to talk about the midlife crisis and everything, but I really wanted to start with your story because I really do. I feel like everyone has a story to tell, no matter how boring some people think they are. I love hearing people's stories. I'd love to know a bit about you, how you grew up and what inspired you to go into psychology.
That is an interesting story. I've reflected on that. I think when you're a psychologist, if you're a mental health professional and a therapist for somebody else, it's really important to examine your reasons for wanting to do that work.
Sorry, I apologize. I was just I just thought I wasn't recording, but I am recording. Yeah, I apologize for that look on my face just then. Please go on.
So no, it's an interesting question. My story in a summary, well, about me. So I'm 55-year-old guy who lives in Sydney, Australia with his wife. Sarah and I've got 2 young adult sons that both happen to be living at home. One moved out for a few years and now he's back because he's doing postgrad studies, and everybody knows Sydney's an expensive place to live. If you haven't got a good job, you can't move out of home. So we've got 2 adult sons that are living alongside us still. I love the outdoors, and Sydney's a great place to do outdoorsy things, whether it's surfing or bushwalking or cycling. And I'm pretty happy when I'm outdoors with my family and friends. That's one of the things I turn to when I'm feeling a bit depleted, is to spend time with people and be outdoors. I'm a clinical psychologist who, and to be a clinical psychologist, it means that you've gone and done postgraduate studies in clinical psychology. So I did that at uni and as well to do my work. When I grew up, I grew born in England, but I grew up in Sydney, so I feel like an Aussie.
Who do you go for in the cricket? Who do you go for in the cricket?
Australia.
Okay, you're an Aussie.
Yeah, exactly. and when we're playing England, yeah, exactly. You can't really want Australia. If England's playing somebody else, I just don't feel aligned with England very much. It's just not a thing. I'm very aware that that's my culture. That's my cultural background.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to examine my feelings when the Queen died, for instance, and there was this sort of outpouring of emotion and a sense of connection. And I felt that, I've been to Westminster Abbey. I've been to see my family origins in England. Really interested in genealogy. So I feel connected with my roots there. And I know that's my culture, but it doesn't feel like I owe England anything, you know. I feel much more tied to an Australian identity. Anyway, mum and dad were both health professionals. They actually met at uni in anatomy class.
Oh,
Mum's not with us anymore. She was a physiotherapist, and dad a medical researcher and a physician. And so, yeah, mum ran her physio practice from the front studio in the house that we grew up in, suburban Sydney. So she was around all the time for us, and we would often see her patients coming and going. And Dad worked in a hospital and had a lab with a whole lot of scientists downstairs. And if he wasn't seeing a few patients up on the ward, he was downstairs in the lab trying to come up with new treatments and understanding the molecular science behind certain disorders. And so they both, you know, had sort of this science background, and were really devoted to science and using science to help people. But mum was a real spiritualist as well.
right.
And she was there was room for hard science. You know, she was really into astronomy as well, and would tell me all about how Einstein's theories are being proven correct over time, even though he developed them in the 20s and 30s. And now with advanced technology, she's really into sort of sciencey stuff. But she had room to talk about, she saw herself more as a healer. She often used the word healing rather than treatment. And she would often say things like, it's less about the exact maneuver I do or the treatment that I do with a patient. It's more about how I engage with them. It's about it's about putting hands on them and letting them feel touched, and connecting with them. She said that's how people get better.
Yeah.
And so that was just part of me growing up. And Dad, you know, he was a medical scientist. He's still around and intellectually very active, mentoring other people in his field, still in his 80s. You know, hardcore scientist, but he had room for faith, for his religious faith, and didn't talk about it a lot, but and was a real humanist as well. I remember once being quite young, and Dad had taken me to my junior soccer game, and he had to do a ward round where he pops in and sees patients in the big hospital where he worked. He used to treat people with conditions like lupus and multiple sclerosis and things like that. And he was seeing this woman who happened to be a mother, and she was had been very unwell. And he had tried a novel treatment that he and some colleagues were working on, and she'd responded really well to this. And when we came and did the ward round, he was just checking up on his patients. She saw him and she was like, "Oh, Professor Basten, it's so good to see you. Thank you." And I realized she was crying with just gratitude. And I saw his bedside manner, and he was a human. He wasn't a doctor or a physician. He was just a human being with another human being. And she turned to me and said, "You don't realize how special your dad is. He's amazing." And it was one of those moments when you realize that your dad isn't just dad.
Yeah.
You know, for everybody, their mum and dad is just like, "Oh, that's just dad." You know, he's really embarrassing. So that was really interesting, you know. And he also would reflect with me occasionally about what it meant to be a good doctor, but actually a good person as well.
Yeah.
He sort of introduced me informally to moral philosophy. He was quite a philosopher and valued artists and valued philosophers. And he would often talk about the role of artists in life, you know. And when it came time to help to sort of work out what I would do as a career, his main advice was, apart from doing what you're interested in, he said, we all have an obligation to make a contribution to society. He said, "Yeah, you need to find a way to do that."
Wow. No pressure.
Because we owe that to society. If we live in society, we have to contribute to it.
Yeah.
And B, because if you do that, you'll feel happy, you'll feel content.
Yes,
and he was right, you know. It's this beautiful advice that's not just his, it's there in literature in the world, which is we often feel better about ourselves when we're giving back. and he was very pragmatic about that. He'd point to the house we were living in. He'd go, if you're a builder, and you can build a house that's going to last for more than 100 years, you're making a fantastic contribution. The artist who makes the world a better place is making a contribution. People that work in the local council, the local government area that enable us to live the life that we want, fantastic contribution. You don't have to be Mahatma Gandhi or a medical researcher to make a big contribution.
That's right.
So he was very open about that, but he was just, he made me sort of aware that I should be thinking about that. And I have. So I had a mother that was, and mum was very community minded as well. She was always sort of organising street parties and talked to everybody, knew all the neighbours. She founded a netball club because there wasn't one. She had a daughter and a sister, and she was like, oh, well, if there's not a netball club, we'll start one. And it's still around.
Yeah, I love that.
And she was just working tirelessly, and Dad was working tirelessly all the time. So consequently, I had to learn as a professional how to set limits. Like, I had no role modeling for limit setting at all. My mum was one of those women of her age and society where she wasn't very good at. She was too good at self-sacrificing.
Yeah.
So I had some amazing, beautiful role modeling and upbringing, but I had this sort of self-sacrificing role modeling as well, which I've had to correct. And I think that's what we all do, isn't it? We take the gems of our childhood and we try to replicate them with our own children, and we enjoy them and appreciate them, and then we try to do even better.
That's it. True. True. Well, because that's one of the things that I think about myself in regards to psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, counselors. How do you not get worn out? It must be very, I guess in my mind, I just think, it must take a lot of energy to be feeling and taking that energy from other people all day, and to then be able to replenish yourself. So what do you do? How do you handle that?
There's quite a few things. There's a little process I go through at the end of every consultation, which helps to partition that. So I'll reflect on it a little bit, and I'll make some notes straight away, because there's a space in your mind where if you sort of open your mind up and you just make some connections, I'll just sit there for 60 seconds and not do anything. And thoughts and feelings come to mind, and I get some ideas on what this person needs, what their real needs are, and I'll put that in my notes, and we'll maybe address that the next session. Be aware of the emotions that I'm left with, because that it just means I need to process that, but it also gives me a clue about what they're feeling. And a big part of the ritual is make some notes in their file. And then I can feel like, okay, that's wrapped up. But I'll also ask myself a simple question, which I often get my clients to do, which is, in what way did that session go well? What did we achieve? So that's part of the wrapping up, so I can leave it alone. But it also means that you end up feeling okay about it.
Yeah.
So it might be really hard work. You're talking about good things, so really hard things, and the client's in a lot of pain. But my job isn't just to feel their pain. I have to feel their pain a little bit to have empathy, but my job is to help them to feel better. And most consultations on most days, I do end up with a feeling like I'm making a positive difference. So you end up feeling, even though there's two things happening at the same time, there's like distress and pain that you can relate to, but at the same time, it's interconnected with helping the person. So that feels good. And then I just, I do the things that I know work for me in terms of self-care, which is all the basics.
I know a lot of people don't know what the basics are, do they?
Yeah. There's this cool acronym which is MEDS, your MEDS.
Yeah.
So you need to do a bit of meditation. So there's lots of different ways to meditate. but you don't want to do just mindless TV watching. You might want to do some mindful stretching, or actually meditate, or do some visual imagery, or go for a walk where you're not doing it to exercise, you're just doing it to connect with your body and with nature. So any type of mindfulness, exercise, diet, and sleep, and they're our foundations. If we're not giving back to the body and the spirit and the central nervous system, we can't function well, whatever you're doing. Even if you're a young mum or a young parent and you're not working at the moment, you still got to be very mindful and get a little bit of exercise, watch your food intake, and get some sleep.
Yeah. That's perfect, isn't it? Well, that's it. But as you say, I mean, I guess in saying that people don't necessarily know what those basics are, sometimes we know what they are, but we just still don't do them.
Or we don't prioritize them,
That's it. It's part of that, giving so much to others. And it's, that's something that I've really had to concentrate on these last few years myself, even, and I guess I realized that I was such a giver, and that I was putting so much energy out, that I need to take those breaks, and I need to come back and balance myself as well and do those things. And that's where, well, as most of my listeners would know, I'm, on Instagram and that. And for me, often my meditation time is going for a walk on the beach or something. And for me, a lot of it is based around gratitude as well. And often I show my gratitude through things like photos. If I'm walking along and I just see something beautiful that speaks to me, I love to just take a photo of it. And
yeah. I know when we're taking a photo, it means that we've appreciated what's around us.
Yeah.
And we've stopped and connected with it and had that aha moment. And then if we want to share it and so on, that's right. Gratitude and appreciation, they help top us, top us up.
Yeah, that's it. And it's all about balance, isn't it? So, well, what we wanted to, why I brought you on, Chris, today is because I figured there's so many different things we could be discussing. But I really had a lot of people, I guess I've just noticed, and I was saying, unfortunately, I guess I am around that middle age-ish point now. I still just tell my kids I'm young and beautiful, but I guess I'm at the middle age as well. And I guess, even for myself, I feel like maybe I'll move here. Chris and I actually sort of have had giggles with ourselves and going, well, maybe this is our midlife crisis, that we packed up, we sold our house, packed up and moved to the Bahamas. Probably not the worst thing you could do as a midlife crisis, but I'm quite enjoying it. But I really have noticed a lot of people struggling with this around me. And it seems to come in, it comes in different ways, and from me looking in, I can sort of see it happening. But I just thought, it's really interesting. And I wanted to find out some actual sort of facts about it, and so start with that with you. What is a midlife crisis? Are we all just going to go and try and buy a Porsche and, or is it going and getting depressed? Is it, is there some chemical imbalance going on in our brains that just hits at a certain age? Can you tell us something about start us off?
We do know a bit about it. Various people have done some good research. Some of it, amazingly, like what we call longitudinal research. There's a colleague who I don't know, I've just read his work, who's followed people up for 75 years. That's unheard of in my business,
Like
and it's pretty rare.
From youth to...
Normally he'll follow the same people right through their lifespan.
Right.
And look at what happens. But that's a small sample size. It's easier to do research, say, and interview people in their, 20s and then 30s and then 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and do it all in the same year. So you take cross sections.
Right.
And that's been well done for decades now, starting with especially Erickson on identity. And he used the word crisis he was the one who coined the term identity crisis, which often happens as you transition from adolescence into adulthood. And he studied that a lot. And he had something to say about what happens when you get older as well. Anyway, so we do know a bit about it. And it's really helpful to have some different language about it. And this idea of having midlife, we do go through a certain stage in our life where things change. And it's helpful to have some language around it. And I think midlife, that's a good term. You know, it's not young adult, and it's definitely not getting close to being senile or really old or
Hopefully.
retired. But we will, like in medical and psychological jargon, we do use the term senile, and not in a derogatory way, but you got to, you know, we talk about it.
Yeah.
And go, yeah, well, I'm in between that. And there's a number of changes that happen, and a lot of people don't end up in a crisis. So it's nice to kind of go, well, I'm in a transitional phase. So it's not a judgment. It's just a term that we say things are changing.
Yeah.
And then we go further and say, I'm getting a lot of challenge and stress with this. Like, I'm finding it really hard. And then we can go further again and say, okay, now I'm in a state of crisis. And the research that I've read says, you know, up to 30% of people will have a sense of crisis. Subjectively, they will say, I feel like I'm in a crisis. Right. 30%. And there's no gender difference. You know,
I was wondering about
versus
that.
30%. It's interesting. Okay. It manifests differently. Right. For men and women. But yeah, but when more, that's a subjective self-report. When say social psychology researchers use an objective measure of distress or crisis, which they've tried to do, then it's less. It's like 15 to 20% of people. So we could say about 100% of people have a sense of, wow, things are changing. My life is different now. Like, I'm feeling like things are changing, about 100%. 50 to 60% of people, like probably a bit more than 50%, will say, yeah, I'm finding this really hard. It's stretching my coping resources. Yeah. And let's say about 20% of people at some point would feel like, no, I've blown my coping resources and now I'm in crisis. Yeah.
And I quite like that, though. I quite like how you sort of termed that as like, so either midlife transformation, midlife challenge, maybe, or midlife crisis. But
correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And when the researchers interviewed people, they found for a lot of people, there were more positives than negatives.
Right.
It's a time of transition that's can be really good. And actually it's going to happen at the same time. I can really relate to this. Might be helpful if I sort of talk about my ambivalence, for instance. Ambivalence, you know, is when we have conflicting emotions about the one thing at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I struggle with the distance that I've got in my relationship with my children sometimes. Right. And there's a part of me that longs for that closeness that we had when they were dependent on me all the time. They needed their daddy to get them to school and to wipe their tears and to put them to bed at night. And we would tell stories, and I'd read them books, and we'd have more hugs. Geez, I'm glad that's over though. You know, like, I've got so much more time to do my own thing. I can actually now prioritize my own needs. I've got more time. I've got more time to spend with my wife, Sarah. Yeah. We can plan holidays and we can do things that we want to do. We don't have to like go to adventure parks. Yeah. And then we might go somewhere where there's an amazing gallery or a beautiful, beautiful architecture. And we'd be on holiday and I'd have to be like, we're not doing architecture, we're doing parks and
that's beaches. Right, because the kids, the kids are just going to be chaos.
Yeah, that's right. So I miss it. And I feel a bit concerned that we're not as close and as connected. And I think it's not because we've got a bad relationship. They're just young adults that want to spend time with their peers and do fun things away from mum and dad. So I miss it and I worry about it. And at the same time, I'm delighted to have all this time free to do the things that I want to do. Yeah. So that would be a classic example of there are positives and negatives in in this transitional phase.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a bit of a throat.
That's okay.
My relationship with my father has changed a lot in the last 10 years. And, you know, he just needs me around a little bit more now. And I kind of miss the way he used to pick up all the pieces, and he was always there for me. And now increasingly I'm there for him, helping him to make a few decisions and supporting him out with things. And it doesn't feel too much like a burden, but I'm aware that it's changing, and I worry about his health, worrying about his solitude now that mum's not there and he's got to adjust to living on his own. And it feels like a little bit of a challenge, but I also treasure the fact that I can be there for him, and that we've got a new level of closeness where he's vulnerable enough to ask me to help him out a little bit. So that father-son relationship is changing, and the nuance has changed. And if I can manage the negatives, you know, like the worry and realizing that I actually have to, well, I don't have to, but I choose to plan to meet some of his needs every fortnight or every month and contribute to his life. If I'm happy to do that, then there's a net positive. So one of my tips for most people, if they're feeling like there's a lot of stress and challenge, is to then start to look at that nuance and think and use acceptance. Of course, with every stage of life you go through, there's going to be some changes. And there's going to be some good and bad. But so just accepting it. I think some people that really struggle, it's because they don't accept the way their body is changing, they're aging, they look different. You know, maybe their health has changed, their sexuality has changed. The male menopause is pretty mild, like it's a bit questioned, but female menopause, like it's a big thing that everybody will go through, and that can be contributing to somebody's sense of transition.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it related to menopause? But I must admit, I've never heard of male menopause. What's that?
As I said, some people don't think it happens, but a male, for men, that it's just the equivalent is that our testosterone levels start to drop.
Right.
You know, and our body is changing. But it's just, you know, some people kind of go, oh, please, come on, it's not really a thing. Just because your testosterone levels are dropping, it is not the same thing.
Yeah, do you get night
male equivalent
sweats?
of childbirth? There's no equivalent to childbirth. No.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, exactly what are you getting in this male version? Like, other night sweats? Are there, I don't even know what other migraines.
No, it's so benign, it's so mild, but you know, it's talked about a little bit. No, but you know, but menopause and even perimenopause is, you know, it's a big thing. It doesn't drive midlife change. It's not the main driver. I think there's so many other things. So the things that change naturally when you're in your sort of 50s, especially, or from 45 to 60, say, are relational. So, you know, if you've got children, they grow up and don't need you as much, and they sort of start getting ready to move out. Your relationship with friends might change. Your career is changing. And the interesting thing is these changes, they're inevitable. They're just natural. But they reveal other changes, or they reveal, it's like a storm maybe on a beach that then reveals something, the storm in itself. And then you go, oh, I didn't realize there was this old shipwreck there, or something like that. So these old skeletons can emerge. So if your marriage is, or your life partner relationship hasn't been looked after, if there's not a lot of respect or love, or if there's been hurts, when the kids are gone and maybe you're struggling with some other things in your life, if that's not super strong, that will really become much more prominent and leap out at you. Or if, you know, the other thing that happens is you get to the end, you start eyeing off in your 50s, like me, I start thinking, gosh, when am I going to stop work? And I need to start planning for that. And then you become aware of things like financial security. How much money have I got? What have I done with my life? These big existential questions emerge. And if you're not equipped to deal with them well, then you end up with emotional pain. And then the way people deal with their emotional pain, it's like dominoes falling. Then how people deal with their emotional pain, if they don't do that in a mindful way, they end up doing some unhealthy things. And that's when you get the cliche ideas, people have an affair, or they go and buy an expensive car, move to the Bahamas. But actually, when it's done mindfully, and you think, okay, this is a change in our life, how can we do it? When it's done mindfully, and when you say it out loud and you use your voice, which is, I know, one of your things that you often talk about, Suzanne, in your podcast, it can be really healthy. So when somebody, an example of doing it in an unhealthy way is if I'm unhappy and I'm questioning, have I done well in life? What's my career been like? And I'm turning into an older man. Does anybody find me attractive anymore? I don't know if my wife finds me attractive anymore. Our sex life isn't the same. If I don't go and talk to her about that, and I go and start flirting with a younger colleague at work, that's not a healthy way to meet that need. I should go and talk to my wife. Kind of go, I'm feeling older. Can we talk about our intimacy, please? That's a healthy way to deal with it. If Sarah and I felt like, oh gosh, well, we've been living in the suburbs and the kids are about to fly the coop. Well, how are we going to live our life now? If we have that chat and we plan it together and we decide to uproot and move somewhere beautiful together because we've got an envisaged plan, and we end up living down the road from you in the Bahamas, I wouldn't call that a crisis. I'd actually seriously call that a nicely planned way to manage the change in our life, because change is happening. It's a transition. So we're actually rolling with the transition and doing it in a healthy way because we've used our voice, we've planned it, we know what our goals and our dreams are, and we're living our dream, but we've said it out loud. So using your voice and enacting your dreams, which is sort of one of your things, that actually helps us to ride the wave of change.
Yeah.
Whereas if I don't say it out loud and I try to solve all my problems myself, I'm probably going to end up, especially as a guy, women seem to have a bit more wisdom. Sorry, guys out there, if you're listening. Women tend to naturally orient towards their friends and their sisters.
Yeah.
And they were more likely to say things out loud, like, I'm a bit unhappy with this, I'm just working through this. And us guys, we have a bit of a hero mentality where it's like, okay, I got a problem. I got to solve this problem. And we've got some lessons to learn of togetherness and like saying things out aloud. And then we can ride the wave of change rather than getting smashed by the wave.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I love all of that, because that's obviously, that's just what I'm about. I think it just really has hit home for me, especially these past few years. And it's I'm always saying it to the kids, even have a conversation. When you stop having conversations with people, whether it's with a teacher, whether it's with your partner, whether it's, I don't know, I just find, and especially with things like social media and, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and messaging people, and things are misunderstood as well, and obviously people don't always know exactly what you're meaning, but I just always, but it's me as well. And I know that I'm not like everyone else, but I just put it out there, because unless we say it, then there's so many things that people just start thinking in their minds, oh, is that person, why aren't they speaking to me? Why, have they, all of the reasons. And we're so hard on ourselves. But for me, that's so important. But something I wanted to ask you about as well, which you touched on there, was in a relationship. How does this work though, because I guess that's where I feel like often that's happening. I'm seeing that happen as well, where maybe one person is further down the track of maybe, because I think, at this sort of age as well, I know I've, become very contemplative. And so if one person is a bit further down that track of, whether it's maybe finding their spirituality or just trying to work through some of those things, those big life things, philosophical questions as well. But if the other partner is maybe still stuck in, well, I'm saying stuck, so I know I'm making that a bit negative, but I don't mean to. But, if the other partner is maybe just focused on trying to get through a day of work, you know,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking, I don't know, say there's a wife and, or let's say it this way, say the wife's working. The wife's
Mm.
working, the husband's at home, the husband's, been thinking of all of these things. The wife comes home and the last thing she wants to do is talk about have a deep and meaningful
Mhm.
conversation. What do they do?
Um, it's a good question. Like, I think it speaks of everyday struggles in so many houses,
Mm,
around the world. These things can happen. I think, um, when there's a gap in your relationship, not if, but when they happen, it's, uh, we can go back to core foundation stones like, this is why I love and respect the person, and accepting points of difference. Um, and saying things out loud, it really does help. I just say that so many times to my
mm,
clients, and often the role of the therapist in the room, if you're doing individual therapy work, the therapist's job is sometimes just to say things out aloud that need to be said.
mm.
And so at the dinner table, or when you're going for a walk or something, or lying in bed, anytime, you can just say, you know, um, I'm doing a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and quite a bit of meditating at the moment. Um, uh, I'm more interested in that than you, I think, and that's okay. So all I've done is just said it out aloud. There's no judgment. There's no should or ought.
Yeah.
It's just saying, oh, that's what we're up to at the moment. I could say, oh, look, I would love, I've like, this book that I've been reading has really opened my mind and changed my mind. When you're ready, I'd love you to read it, but
Mm,
when you're ready. So I'm allowed to say, this is what I would like, or I'd like to be able to talk about it sometime, but only when you're ready. So we need to just say things, and we'll see where they go. And it's done with patience and respect, in that
mm.
loving way.
Yeah.
And if it's really important, we need to say, actually, this is really important to me. Um, so we need to, yeah, when we say things out aloud, it just opens up room for things to evolve in the right direction. We don't have to drive change, but it will evolve.
And not in an well, I guess, I mean, with anything, that you don't necessarily mean to say something in an accusatory tone, but
Mm,
sometimes it might be heard that way because, you know, if you say I don't know, say you say, oh, I can't even think, but, say you are saying, you're not as intimate as I'd like you to be.
mm.
Um, the first thing someone could do is put up their wall and be like, what? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right. So for practice, it takes practice. Like, we talk all the time and we know our partner intimately, but we actually we really need to think about just some, a really healthy communication strategy, which often just is about sequencing. Like, I know I want to say this, but I need to say, a few things first.
yes.
Like, this is happening, so I'm not adding any judgment to it at all. It's just a descriptive statement, not an evaluative statement. Um, uh, and then see how the person responds.
Yeah.
And if they get defensive, then you can repeat that and go, well, I just raised this because I think it's happening, and I didn't want either of us to feel bad about it. It looks like you're feeling bad about it because I'm just saying that out loud now. And you go, well, no, I just kind of want to be able to. I'm just saying it's there, and if we want to, we could talk about it, and so on. And so you're sort of, providing, if you like, a role modeling of just love, what I'd call loving conversations.
Mm,
And we can do that with our kids too when they get older. Is just say, well, we need to talk about this.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be terribly emotional, but it's happening, so we should talk about it.
Yeah. And at least
Mm.
in trying to have that conversation, I guess I feel like you're putting it out there and it is. I mean, a conversation's a two-way street. So it's up to the other person
Mm.
as to whether they are open to listening, open and willing to listen and have that conversation back with you. But it does take one person to start sometimes rather than just
Yeah,
bottling it all up inside, doesn't it?
exactly. I know, that's right, Suzanne. Yeah. And some things get left unsaid for a bit too long.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no,
It's great
definitely.
advice. Yeah.
So, okay, this is just something that I've always wanted to ask a psychologist. So, does Sarah ever feel like you're like psychoanalyzing her?
For sure. And the kids do too. Yeah.
Are they like,
And
Dad, that's enough?
I am not your client. You are not my psychologist. With the kids, it's a bit easier because my usual response is, and it's really genuine. I was like, I'm talking to you as a father. This is what fathers do.
Yeah.
So no, we are going to have this conversation. It's not. I don't talk to my clients this way. I'm just letting you know. With Sarah, very rarely, because we just do get along really well, and there's a really good foundation of just trust and respect. But sometimes I start to overthink a conversation, especially if there's a bit of emotion or we're disagreeing on something, and I'll then sort of I'll just be trying to be respectful of her point of view, and it will come across like I'm in a counseling session, because I will be deliberately being empathic. I'll be like, I think I can see your point of view. And she's like, don't do that. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm a bit trapped, because I actually do genuinely want to be empathic. I want to
Yeah,
validate
yeah.
your feelings as your life partner, not as a mental health professional. So then it's a bit of a spiral, because then I start becoming self-conscious of me talking, and then it doesn't go so well. And
Yeah.
it's happened a few times. And then later on, like maybe about a day later, we can have a laugh about it. But at the time, it makes it hard. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that. I can imagine that happening. And you're always a little bit wary, when you're out to dinner or something with a psychologist or something, and you're like, okay, what was he thinking about me? Has he diagnosed me today?
Yeah.
Well,
For the record, if any of you know psychologists, when we're not at work, we are not thinking about analyzing anybody. We just want to relate. And we
good to
realize that
know.
there's a whole world of emotion out there, and all I'd like to say all psychologists realize that we've all got issues, we've all got baggage. Psychologists do as much as anybody else. We just kind of learn how to manage it and keep it out of the room when we're with our clients.
Yeah.
But we psychologists never want to be thinking analytically about things when we're not at work.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris, your top tips for combating midlife transformation.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Like, obviously, so it's not an abnormal thing. We're all
No, that's
likely
right. I
to
can't
go
say
through
there's
it.
one top tip. There's a constellation of things that have to go together.
Yeah.
So one of them is be open to change and roll with change, because fighting it will hurt you. There's a saying which is, time will always win.
Yeah.
I can't stop the clock ticking around. One day I will be 70.
Yeah.
If I don't die
Hopefully.
before then.
That's right.
Like the great philosopher and the Roman emperor philosopher Marcus Aurelius says in his book Meditations, like 1 out of 4 of his meditations is, he says, one day you'll be dead. He keeps reminding people. He says, and that awareness is that time marches forward, and therefore we should appreciate whatever you're doing now, more. So sorry to get onto mortality, but I think it can be one of the aspects of our mindfulness in life, and it does help us to appreciate things more. So it's about thinking, well, I think about this with my young kids, they're young adults, it's like they're in their 20s, and I'm like, you should be living your 20s now. Don't try to live your 30s yet. You should be. They're like, oh, I need to get a job, and then I've got to do this, and then I'll get a loan. I'm like, you know what? Maybe you should travel.
Yeah.
Maybe
wow,
you
you're
should
like the
just
best dad ever.
maybe you should just take a year off. You've got like another 30 years to get yourself a loan. You don't want to do that now.
Yeah.
And so you live your 20s well, and then you think about living your 30s well, and think about your 40s well. And the 40s are a tough time. I actually had quite a few friends that really struggled turning 30. It was almost like a premature midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And which I'll tell you about briefly before we get back onto it. And one of the things that happens with a midlife stress, when it goes from not just transition to stress, and it might even be a crisis, is when we get confronted with the gap between what we thought we would be doing with our life and what we are doing with our life.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. It could be, with our career success, or how our family would look, or how our household would look. It's often at a fairly materialistic level, or this is the sort of life I thought I'd be living, or the income I'd be having, or the career progression. But it could be at a relational level. I thought I would be in a relationship by now. I thought our marriage would be better, or something like that. Anyway, and that can hit people at any time, but hitting the decades is when we do big reviews. We're like, oh, at 30, I thought I would be here. I thought I would have bought myself a home, or I'd have a mortgage. And quite a few of my friends, that it's jarring when you realize you're not in your 20s anymore. You're not that carefree young adult that's got a bit of money and a bit of time free. Anyway, you know what I mean? It can happen. So it can happen at any time. And it can really hit us when we're in our 50s. So own the change and ride with it. It's like a wave, and you want to ride. You don't want to stand there getting smashed by the wave, or trying to pretend it's not happening, or whatever, or standing up to a wave. You want to roll with it or dive with it.
Yeah.
So accepting change, and then embracing ambivalence. So kind of going, yeah, I do have some negative feelings about that. There's some loss, and maybe I'm struggling with some aspects of it. Being emotionally honest with yourself is good, and saying it out aloud, what you and I've both been saying today, saying any of that out aloud is going to be helpful.
And when you're saying it out loud, you can even just be saying it to yourself.
It could be, journaling.
Or journaling or something,
Expressing things to yourself, yes.
Okay.
And I think just saying it to one or two people, saying it to a close friend, a sibling, or a partner, and explaining, I don't want a solution here. I don't want you to fix this. I'm just saying, I'm just aware that this is where I'm up to in life, and I'm just working through this at the moment, and I'll probably be okay. But I just thought I'd let you know, do you do the same thing, and inviting a dialogue about it.
Yeah.
So being open to our emotions, and accepting that things are changing. And then that opens up, when we accept it, that opens up an opportunity to embrace the positives that are sitting alongside the negatives.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges for people is not accepting change. That's when you see people trying to, a sign of, if you look at the literature, as I have in preparation for this, a sign of a crisis, as opposed to just stress, is when somebody's spending a whole lot of money on their own. They haven't talked to their partner about it. It's okay to spend money doing something adventurous or new in your life, but you got to bring your partner on board. If you want to move house, if you do it together, it's part of the way you're rolling with the wave. That's all cool.
Okay, so it's a good
doing
thing.
Things on your own, spending a lot of money, or when somebody goes and gets cosmetic surgery, or they want to buy a whole new, young, vibrant wardrobe, it's like you're not accepting it. Own it. And some of the people that I admire, aesthetically, the people that seem to be the most elegant and sophisticated in their 50s, they're not dressing like a 30-year-old. They're dressing really well for their age, for a man or a woman. They're owning it, and they you can see that they're really comfortable in their own self. And Suzanne, here's something I want us to talk about, because I want to hear what you think about this, because you think about this as much as me. Is that when we get to a stage where we're confronted with a gap between what we thought we might have in our life here, and then what is happening, you can see where I'm going with this, can't you? We need to be conscious of our self-evaluation and have a big injection of self-compassion.
Yeah.
And there are ways of doing that. And one of my favorite ways, I'll go first, but I want to know what you think, is when we need to do a bit of an audit and ask ourselves this question, a double question: in what way is it understandable that I feel pretty bad about where life is at the moment? So I think, it's because I thought of this, or, in my case, it was, I just assumed that I don't know, that my young adult kids would be wanting to hang out with me more, and we would go on surfing holidays together when they're older, and maybe, you know, they'd want to come with us to holidays, and they'd be at home of an evening, and we'd have more interesting chats. And I'm like, well, it's understandable that I had that vision, because I love my kids and we have a good
Yeah.
relationship, and I was a bit like that when I was young, but so it's not, I don't think anything's gone wrong. It's just that they're just normal young adults and they don't want to be at home every night.
Yeah.
So in what way is it understandable that I'm in a bit of pain? And then you go, but in what way also is it in what way is it true that I'm doing okay as a dad?
Mm.
Is there any evidence that our relationship is good? So there's room to sort of to look for that. And then I can acknowledge that, can I do better as a dad? Always, always. But it's not with self-criticism, it's with that growth mentality.
Yeah.
And then I can say, but I'm actually doing, there's plenty of evidence that our relationship is somewhere between okay and really pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So it's a time in life where we where we need to be able to consciously reflect on things with self-compassion. If we've struggled with something or we haven't done as well as we thought, we need to be able to acknowledge that and go, yeah, that's true. But maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe the problem was with my expectations.
Yeah.
That were held rigidly. I just thought that I'd be doing this, or I thought I'd have a house that was like this, or that I'd have a beautiful boat that I could go out on. I can't afford a boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just can't. Does that mean I'm a failure? And when you have a sense of failure and inadequacy, that's a sign that you need self-compassion. And you should look up Suzanne Mann's work on self-compassion.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because, do you know, the first thing that it made me think of was when people who know my story know that I am a recovering perfectionist. And when I realized that was the first time I went and saw a psychologist, because it was like this aha moment. And because I didn't even really know what it meant. And I seriously, I remember the day of looking it up on my phone. And it was after I had done a run. And like I'd just done I think it was the pub to pub. And I felt dreadful.
For anybody that doesn't know, that's a long, very, very long, very hilly run. Held in warm months.
It was, but I was so, usually after doing something like that, you are pumped up and you're proud of yourself and you're feeling great. And I felt none of that. And I was just so upset that I didn't do as well as I thought I was going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great example. Yeah.
And that was the day that I remember I had a discussion with my brother, actually. And he said, but Suzanne, you've always been a perfectionist. And I'm like, no, actually. And he said something. And then Chris came and Chris said the same thing to me. And I went, what are you talking about? I'm like, what? And I looked it up. And when I looked it up, because I just thought being a perfectionist meant, you wear perfect little suit outfits and high stiletto heels and stuff, And when I looked it up, I thought, oh my gosh, this is describing me. And it really was. It was about these expectations that I was setting for myself. And, that sort of started my journey that, has been for me just such transformation. I think, I know it's constantly going, but it's been part of me becoming my best self and loving myself, loving life, and being a better mother more as well. And one of the that is the biggest thing, when I was doing the compassion course that was specifically talking about self-compassion, we talk a lot about expectations, and that expectations only lead to, sadness, basically.
Yeah.
It's good to have, and that's why I talk about, that's why with Voices to Dream, for me, it's not that it's so important to dream, but for me, dream is hope. It's saying that you still have hope in your heart, and that, for me, dreaming is a belief that anything's possible. If you put, put your mind to it, you can do these things. You can make a change. One person can make a difference in the world. One person I, as one person, may not be able to stop the war in the Ukraine, but you know what? I can do something in my zone of influence, you know, if I recognize that. And so for me, that it really was a big life lesson to learn that those, to be easier on myself and to understand where those that where to not push myself beyond where those expectations, you know, and this is where even with the kids, you know, I think I think it's so important to, it's something to show them that there is, you know, even if something doesn't work out, I'm always looking for the good things that came out of it. You know, and so for me, those are the things where, you know, okay, no, we did not, you didn't get 100% on that test, but you're actually learning now what it's like to come last. And imagine, you know, because someone's always coming last, and imagine how you're going to now be able to help the next person when they're coming last, because you know what that feels like. And you're not going to, you know, be saying, oh, well, you're last. You know, just little things like that for me. That's how I try to handle it. And yeah, so I think it's a really, really important point. And that is one of my big things. I just think that, you know, and that was one of my questions to you. Do you think this dreaming to make the world a better place? Am I crazy? In a psychologist's opinion, am I crazy?
You might be crazy, but not, I don't know well enough. You might be, but not if you dream. And no, to the contrary, I agree with you. I'll expand on one of your points a little bit because I agree with it so much, and that is that that having a connection with our future in a hopeful way, so having hope, and having an intention to work towards some improvement in the future, is one of for me, it's on a list of universal human needs. I've been doing some reading in the last couple of years to understand this idea of needs. I mean, we all use that term all the time, and we're aware of the idea that needs are different from wants.
Yes.
But it's really worthwhile thinking about our needs, because a lot of us will put aside our needs and we don't honor them. And actually, when we get to middle age, and our needs are evolving. And if we're still pretending that we don't have those needs, or we haven't really thought about what the need is, we're not going to meet that need very well. That's when I might not tell Sarah and come home with a new flashy car without telling her. That's just, you know, if I talk to her about it, she'd probably go, well, okay, you can have that, but why? You know, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what need is that?
Yeah.
And then we'll try to find another way to meet that need. And so on. So, yeah, look, but hope, you know, hope is one of the top dozen, the top 10 or 12 needs that we have. And and we need to have dreams. And I really like the way you talked about it. You were like, you said, because for me, that's like compatible with healthy perfectionism. When we think about perfectionism, there's a healthy version, and it drifts on a spectrum towards unhealthy. And it's worthwhile sort of defining the two a little bit. So we can, a healthy perfectionist will aim for excellence, will enjoy the pursuit of excellence, and will keep, you know, in the face of disappointment, or if they do pretty well when they're aiming for very well, they'll be like, they won't be distressed. They'll be like, oh, it's okay. It's a learning curve. I've still got somewhere to go with that. I'm happy with what I was able to achieve, but I want to be really happy next time, for instance. And so we need to be able to think to ourselves, I wonder how good could I get, you know, and I wonder what I could achieve.
Yeah.
And then we're free to sort of turn a dream in towards, you know, let it drift towards a goal.
Yes.
And start to make it a bit more measurable and give a time frame on it, but only a little bit. A healthy perfectionist will set realistic, achievable goals.
Yes.
Or set a range of goals, for instance. So I might think, well, I want to set up a charity to raise money for the Ukraine, which I'm not doing. It's just an example. I can't solve the war, but I could support some refugees. So I'm gonna, who knows? Like if we raised $1,000, that's something.
Yeah.
Who knows though? What if it takes fine? What if social media takes off and we raise $100,000?
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
And then if I end up falling well short of the $100,000, I'm not going to have a sense of failure because I've had that range of I'd be happy with anything.
Yes.
But I will strive to do my very best, and I'll get the right people on board. So if we know that we're a perfectionist, and a lot of people are, then you can kind of own it and accept it, say it out loud, all these things we were talking about before, but then do it in a bit of a more healthy way.
So I can be a healthy perfectionist.
Yeah.
I quite like that, rather than just saying I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah, striving towards being a healthy perfectionist. Yeah,
Okay.
honestly, it's one of the things
I
talk about a lot at work, because it, when we don't, I think the world is honestly full of amazing perfectionists. And perfectionism, one of my favorite metaphors is that it's like a double-edged sword. You're holding a sword, and the outer blade is sharp and strong, and it can cut through in life, because it means that we often have a little bit more perseverance and determination, and we keep pushing ourselves. And when we discover that our approach doesn't work, we're like, well, I'm going to find another approach. It's like, I am not going to stop. I really kind of I want to strive, and I want to get more done. But this other blade can come back and hurt me.
I was going to say, yeah.
And when we understand the nature of these two blades, we can own the strengths of it. We can have that sort of elements of things like dreaming and goal setting and striving and inner discipline. But we can like put a rubber stopper on the other blade by actually going, oh, you know what? I tend to be really quickly disappointed with myself, or it gives me feelings of inadequacy if I'm not careful. And we can blunt that by doing things like, I'm just going to be more compassionate with myself.
Yeah.
Like really have the language of self-compassion, and have some phrases in my head that help me to do that, while still striving to see who knows what we can achieve.
Yeah.
If we keep trying, and if I get other people to help me, and if we're clever with our strategy, who knows how good things can be. So there's room for dreaming and advancing, but we do it in a way that is not self-injurious emotionally.
Beautiful. Oh, I like that. And I really like that, the double-edged sword there. I like that. Now, Chris, what is there anything that you're currently working on besides your clinical psychology practice? How do people find out about you if they're in Sydney? Can they contact you, or are you on social media? What do they do?
Well, I think the only way to contact me at the moment would be through the website, which is bastenpsychology.com.au. And sort of, if there's any news, it'll come out there. My social media presence is close to zero, so there won't be any announcements there. There's no tags to follow or anything like that at all.
Yeah.
So that might change in the future. I'm working on a couple of things that have come up today.
Yeah.
So when I did some research looking at human needs, universal human needs, I found it really hard as a psychologist to find. There's lots that are written about by developmental psychologists that look at kids and adolescents, things that are written by social psychologists and anthropologists. But there was no good book. So I'm actually working on a book on that. There'll probably be two, one for adults and one for youth.
Yeah.
Because I just talk about it with my clients all the time, and I've actually developed a mini ebook already, which I just give to my clients for free, but I want to develop it into something a little bit bigger and longer, and then I'll look at publishing that.
Oh, you'll have to let me know
about this. Sorry?
You'll have to let me know when it comes out.
Yeah, I'll let you know. Yeah, I'll send you a copy. The other thing that I'm excited about this year is I want to develop a group therapy program that targets obsessional perfectionism, what we call unhealthy obsessional perfectionism, because I've got so many clients that are coming, and they might be having anxiety attacks, or they might have a pervasive feeling of inadequacy that fuels depression,
Mm.
or they end up with an eating disorder. Eating disorders, to a large degree, they're very complex, but they're often driven. The engine room
Mm.
is obsessional perfectionism,
Yeah.
and they're feeling inadequate. They're never feeling in control enough, because the need is absolute. It's like, I need to be 100%. I need to be 100% sure that I'm in control all the time, or I want to know that I'm the best at this, and that's impossible. You can't do that. Like,
No.
we're humans. And so somebody might then, in their adolescence, might then latch onto something that they feel like they can control, or they can perfect their body, or they can control what goes into their mouth. And that's, we were talking today a bit about how we have needs, and if you can't find a healthy way to meet that need, you'll end up with an unhealthy way to meet it. And starving yourself is not a healthy way to feel good
No.
about yourself or to feel in
Wow.
control. So anyway, I've got a whole bunch of clients that I know that could benefit from an extra modular work on obsessional perfectionism. So I talk about it all the time. I'm just going to turn it into an 8-week program, and we're going to run that a few times in the practice with me and a few of my colleagues, and we're going to measure the effectiveness of that and maybe
Yeah.
share that with the
Yeah.
world when we've got other people have done it before. We don't want to reinvent that whole wheel, but we'll take what other people have done and see how it works in an Australian context in an 8-week program, and then I can share that with you too.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. And I just think that when you come together with with other people who are experiencing a similar sort of thing, or thinking the same way, just taking away that sense of loneliness, or that you're the only one, as soon as you can go, oh, there's other people that are going through this,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
just takes a whole layer of stress out of things.
That's
um
right. It's scary. It's scary sharing. It's sort of, we
yeah,
need to get to that point of vulnerability. And
that's
you're
it.
right. It's such a relief
It's so
to know that
freeing
other
when you
people can relate
do.
to that and
That's
can share
right.
that vulnerability and respect that, and actually realize that we're all human and we're all having similar struggles. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gosh, Chris, it fills my heart to know that there are mental health professionals like you out there who are so caring and giving of their time and understanding. It's just beautiful. It's not. I know a lot of people as well who go to psychologists, psychiatrists, or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's so stupid. You're just sitting there. They're taking my money, and I'm just talking or whatever. But
Mm.
you can tell, it's about really helping people for you. And I so appreciate that. And I appreciate your time with me today. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. I will put all of Chris's details on the bio part, or the information part on the audio and
Mm-hmm.
the video. And thank you everyone for watching another episode of Voices to Dream, the fabulous Dr. Chris Basten. I will see you soon, and enjoy your day.